Hi, everybody. So I hope you are staying warm and that you maybe haven't had any power outages or internet problems. If you have, and that is keeping you from doing your work, just let me know and we'll work it out. Okay. But for today, we're going to dig a little deeper into synthesis. You've written an essay for me that, we haven't had much time to do with. I was out last week. So, this week, I'm going to give you some more advice, some more direction. These are some things I anticipate being problematic in student essays. And then I'm going to let you revise them one more time. And then next week, hopefully, we'll be able to conference. So you've had a lot of time to revise and to get these better. So hopefully they will be perfect. Just a disclaimer, my 2-year-old is here, so you may hear her. Just FYI. Okay. So I actually found a lot of this information from a fellow teacher of mine because synthesis is an area that I feel a little weaker in. So this is some really good information from a really great source. So there are a few ways to get a poor grade on a synthesis paper. And one of them is not synthesizing, not truly understanding what it means to synthesize. So here are some ways that students fall short in that. So synthesizing means to put together ingredient X with ingredient Y and getting a whole new idea, a whole new ingredient Z. So you have source X giving information, you have source Y giving information, and you put those together to create your own idea, Z. So the mistake that many students make is they don't put them together. They talk about this source independently and they talk about this source independently, but they don't know how to put the ideas together. So you have an analogy here. This is a difference between chocolate cake versus a piece of chocolate next to a piece of cake. So it's not chocolate cake yet. It's chocolate on its own and it's cake on its own, but you can't call it a chocolate cake. Okay. And we want that chocolate cake. Lower level papers tend to discuss only one source per paragraph. I've warned you guys about this already, so hopefully you're not doing this. But another way you may fall short is if you do bring in another source, you do it separately and you never really discuss how these sources relate to each other. This is what I'm most afraid of in digging into papers. So you need to make sure the sources are conversing with each other, that you're comparing them, you're talking about them in relation to your own argument, and you're mixing them together, not doing them separately. So here's a way to do that. Think to yourself, do these sources agree that I'm including here? Do they disagree? Do they partly agree? This one's a big one. This is higher level thinking where you can pick out, the pieces that they do have common ground on, and then maybe the places where you think, okay, these sources would disagree on this issue. One way to look at it is a conversation. We've talked about that. Get source A to talk back to source B, and so on. Okay, so here is the breakdown of this formula. So you math-minded peeps, maybe this is for you. So X plus Y equals Z. How do I get Z from X plus Y? So here's a great analysis. You're welcome for this. Synthesis is like making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. You get source X, the bread, source Y, peanut butter and jelly, and you put those together, information from both of those, and you make a whole new product. New idea Z, okay? Created from the pieces of others' ideas. So this is a whole new entity. We call this a PB&J. But this on its own is just jelly, and this on its own is just peanut butter. But when you put it on bread, you mix it all together, you have an entirely new idea. This is a synthesis here. So this says here, by putting together the thoughts of others and discussing their relevance, validity, and claims within the context of your own argument, you have to be getting towards your goal and achieving your assertion. You create a synthesis of new information. Okay. So I'm trying to prove my point. I'm trying to prove that I believe your prompt was about students not being a cut corners generation, okay, right now. So if I'm trying to prove that students are not cutting corners, that they're just using their resources to the best of their ability, and, they're blessed with these things that maybe students 50 years ago didn't have, if I'm trying to prove that, I'm going to take information from this source and from this source, and I'm going to push it together, and I'm going to compare it and talk about it in the context of my belief that students are not cutting corners. Why do I need those sources? If I have to create this whole new product, why do I need X and Y? You cannot just have X in one paragraph and Y in another paragraph. You have to combine them. That's why we say at least 2 sources discussed per paragraph. If you don't combine them, okay, if you just discuss them individually, you haven't made that peanut butter and jelly. You haven't made that new product. You've made a peanut butter sandwich maybe, or maybe a jelly sandwich, but the pieces are not intermingling together. So here's a pro tip for you. Make sure you include at least 2 different sources in a paragraph and discuss them in comparison. Okay, so you need to be discussing them together. And then your argument needs to be the reason why you're discussing them. So if you have at least 2 body paragraphs, here's another tip for you. And you use a minimum of 3 sources, which you're required to use. This choice automatically means you're satisfying the AP's rule of using at least 3 sources. So how do I do this? This is probably what's on your mind. How do I get Z, my synthesized thought, from X and Y, my provided sources? So my first tip for you is to include at least 2 places per paragraph in which you use one or more of the following phrases. I'm about to give them to you. When you use these phrases, you're moving closer to actual synthesis. So these are like sentence frames for you. I suggest you start here if you're struggling with this idea. And then what you'll see is that I've highlighted words I think of as synthesis words, so words that really lead you into that process. So here you go. Here are your examples. Although X says blank, and this would be a source, so it would be although source D, or although Jones says yada yada, and Y, which would be another source, okay, you'd have to input a source name or a last name there, argues this. They both fail to acknowledge that, and then this would be your Z. So this would be X plus Y equals Z right here, your new idea. And then these phrases here kind of lead you into that synthesis process. I am very hopeful that this will make it a little more clear for you, this slide, if you haven't understood yet. And then there are several others. So how do I do that? If I have these long quotes that I'm supposed to be comparing, that can get kind of muddy. So my biggest tip for you is that in a synthesis essay, we've never done this before. In analysis, we always quoted. In a synthesis essay, it is better to paraphrase, to put it in your own words, than to quote a source. Now, you still have to cite the source. You still have to do that parentheses, source A, parentheses, or parentheses Jones, if that's the author, parentheses. But paraphrase, put it in your own words. So why is it better to do this than to quote? I got 4 reasons for you. You can condense a significant amount of information. You guys know that wordiness, especially when we were doing analysis, wordiness can get you in trouble if you're just saying the same thing over and over again. It's more about the quality of what you're saying than the quantity. So paraphrasing helps you to condense a little bit instead of having this super long quote. When you guys did your synthesis practice paragraphs, I actually noted that on a few of yours. Okay, this quote is way too long. Let's see if we can condense it. Paraphrase is the best way to do that. Second step, if you're attempting to convey information such as the claim an author is making, you're generally better cutting it down to the basics of paraphrasing, putting it in your own words. You don't want to waste time just quoting just to achieve some goal. It's never going to be on the rubric for AP. You're never going to see on the rubric student quotes source. You can paraphrase, okay? And then another reason 4, this tactic is better than this tactic is different than rhetorical analysis in which you have to quote. So yes, we've had to do that in the past. That was a different essay type. In synthesis, you can gain more room for your own claim when paraphrasing. You gain more room for that Z element. And then here's some tips with how to score high. So how do I score a 5 or a 6 on the synthesis prompt? So the biggest way to do that, and a summation of how to do that, is you need to show you can think for yourself in addition to the sources. This is the first essay we've written that I'm allowing your opinion to come through, okay? That's that Z element. You take X, source A, which would be your X, and source B, which would be your Y, and you push them together and you create Z, which is your own newfound opinion based on sources. Here's an example of thinking for yourself. On the 2015 administration of the AP language exam, the synthesis question addressed the issue of honor codes and cheating, asking students to take a position on whether their school should establish, maintain, revise, or eliminate an honor code. Very close to the synthesis essay you just wrote. The best essays went beyond these sources. They didn't just discuss the sources. Now you have to discuss them, but they created their own meaning based on what they read. Among many issues the sources did not address with regards to cheating were issues such as the culture, in some cases by the emphasis schools and parents place on GPAs, blah, blah, blah. So these are all things that students addressed in their papers that weren't necessarily addressed in the sources. The most proficient writers brought in this information and talked about it, using the sources to support their own argument. So they use the sources, but they're also discussing maybe where the sources are lacking information. That is Z. That's your synthesis there. They went above and beyond, which is why they scored the highest. Okay. If you know something about a particular subject, and most of the time you will know something, or you can have an opinion on what the synthesis prompt is asking of you. It's very general prompts. Show it off in the synthesis essay. Here's a general game plan for you. An overview. I like to give you a little outline. So in your introduction paragraph, you have your classic hook approach. You can build background there. You can talk about, if your prompt is over, we've done the monuments when we did practice on synthesis. If your prompt is over monuments, you can just discuss background information there, maybe in our country of leaving monuments up or maybe pulling them down in certain communities based on people's thoughts and whether they're offended by them. So that could be a building background in your introduction paragraph. So make sure that your assertion is also there, and it needs to lay out all the claims for your paper in your introduction. 2 to 3 sentences, that's fine for an intro. And then you're going to have a body paragraph where you'll have your first minor claim or minor assertion. And that should be embedded in this major assertion in your intro. Then you just take a little piece out of that and it goes into your body paragraph. And then you'll support it with a source, comment on that source, introduce another source and comment on it. But you need to be talking about these together, which is that peanut butter and jelly analogy. You need to be discussing how they compare, contrast, maybe where they leave information out. Okay, and that's really step 3. I got a little ahead of myself. Using the phrases in step 2 of these slides, explain source number 1 and source number 2 together. Okay, and then number 4, if you're seeking a 5 or a 6, you should go beyond the range of information provided by those sources. Use your own knowledge, make your own argument, discuss how those sources compare. You can refute them. You can talk about how they are wrong and they don't support your assertion, or you can qualify them. Okay. And then you'll repeat this process for any remaining body paragraphs. You don't have to write a 5-paragraph essay. 2 body paragraphs is usually pretty good. So these steps right here, 2, 3, and 4, this is what you would do in 1 body paragraph. Discuss each source, comment on them. Okay, use those synthesis phrases I gave you in a previous slide, and then go beyond that range of information. Repeat that process. And then your conclusion, put your claim in different words from your introduction paragraph, and then explain why this should matter to us. Some final tips. What should I do now with all this new information Ms. Garrison's given me? Go back and review this lesson yourself. Yeah, read it one more time. Okay, it helps to sink it in. Open up your Synthesis 1 essay. I think it's from it was due last week, okay, but it may have been dropped 2 weeks ago. Go and open it back up. If you've already submitted it, unsubmit it, all right? And then I want you to implement what you've learned today, especially those phrases. Try to combine your sources. I have a suspicion that a lot of us maybe didn't synthesize properly, so I want you to try to do that now. Read over your essay. Read it at least twice and ensure you've eliminated dead words and phrases. Those are still out there, okay? Remember when we had our dead words and phrases funeral? Yeah, make sure there's not any in there. Make sure that your rubric, you look at your rubric and you feel like you're going to score well by reading your rubric. You use it as a checklist and make sure your essay's clean, and then you can turn it back in, and I'll give you feedback hopefully this next week. that's it, folks. So thank you for sticking around. This slideshow should be available for you on Google Classroom. If you have any questions, just email me and we will have conferences over those essays soon. Bye, guys.